A loud voice echoed across the ranch. "Do it! Hurry up!" The command cut through the quiet morning like a gunshot, making every worker freeze in place. The rancher stood in the middle of the yard, his eyes sharp, his voice filled with urgency no one had ever heard before. He was known as a calm man, a man who never rushed, never panicked. Yet today, something was different. A young stranger stood nearby, trembling, his face pale, as if he carried a secret too heavy to hold. The wind slowed. The animals grew restless, and an uneasy silence spread across the land. No one dared to ask questions, but fear was written on every face. What could be so urgent? What was the rancher about to do that required such desperation? And why did it feel like one wrong move could change everything forever? In that moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath, because whatever happened next would not only shock the ranch, but the entire region. The rancher was known as a calm and respected man who never raised his voice and never acted without thinking. Everyone in the region trusted him because he treated people with fairness and quiet strength. His ranch was a place of peace where the days moved slowly and nothing ever felt out of control. Workers followed their routine, animals stayed calm, and even strangers felt safe the moment they arrived. He believed in patience, and he solved every problem with a steady mind, never with fear. But on that day, something felt different from the very beginning. The air carried a strange tension, and the usual calm seemed to fade away. When the young stranger stepped onto the land, everything quietly shifted. The rancher noticed him instantly, and for the first time, a shadow of concern crossed his face. No one understood it yet, but that small moment was the start of something that would soon break the silence of the entire ranch. The rancher kept his eyes on the stranger as he stepped closer, his slow footsteps heavy with meaning, and the workers noticed how the usual calm in his posture had disappeared, as if something inside him had shifted without warning. The stranger tried to speak, but his voice trembled, his breath uneven, and his hands slightly shaking as if he had been running from something far worse than exhaustion. The rancher did not interrupt him, yet his sharp gaze studied every detail, from the dust on his clothes to the fear hidden deep in his eyes. And in that silent observation he understood more than the words could ever explain. A quiet tension spread across the ranch, and even the animals began to sense that something was wrong, their movements restless and uneasy. The workers exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to step forward or stay back, because they had never seen their leader like this before. The stranger finally whispered something barely audible, but whatever he said caused the rancher's expression to harden instantly, his jaw tightening as a serious silence fell over the ground. But it was no longer just concern now. It was urgency, the kind that does not wait for explanations or second chances. The rancher turned his head slightly, scanning the open land around him as if expecting something or someone to appear at any moment, and that single glance made the workers feel a cold wave of fear run through them because they realized this was not an ordinary situation. Time seemed to slow as the wind passed through the dry fields, carrying a strange feeling that something unseen was getting closer. The stranger looked over his shoulder again and again, unable to stay still, as though danger was chasing him even now, and that constant fear only deepened the growing tension in the air. The rancher took a step forward, placing himself between the stranger and the open path behind him, a quiet protective move that did not go unnoticed by the workers, and in that moment they understood that whatever was happening, it was serious enough for him to act without hesitation. No one asked questions, yet everyone felt the pressure building, like a storm about to break without warning. The rancher's breathing remained steady, but his eyes told a different story, one filled with calculation and silent decisions forming faster than anyone could follow. He looked at the stranger once more, and without needing further explanation, he made a choice that would soon change everything, a choice that came from instinct rather than doubt, because deep down he knew there was no time left to waste, and whatever was coming next would test not only his judgment but the safety of everyone standing on that land. Without giving a single explanation, the rancher suddenly stepped forward and shouted, "Do it! Hurry up!" And his voice carried a force no one had ever heard before, cutting through the air with urgency that left every worker frozen for a split second before confusion took over their faces. Some looked at each other, unsure of what he meant, while others stared at him, waiting for another command that never came, because his eyes made it clear there was no time to repeat anything. The tension rose instantly, thick and heavy, as if the entire ranch had been pulled into a moment where one wrong move could lead to something irreversible. A few workers hesitated, their hands half raised, uncertain whether to act or question him, but the fear of delay pushed them forward even without understanding. The stranger stood still, his breathing sharp, watching everything unfold as if his fate depended on what would happen next, and in many ways it did. The rancher did not look at anyone else now, his focus locked ahead, scanning the distance again as if expecting something to appear at any second, and that silent expectation made the unease even stronger. The wind picked up slightly, carrying dust across the yard, and the sound of hurried footsteps broke the stillness as some workers rushed to follow the command blindly, trusting him despite their doubts. Others stayed back, their hearts racing, unable to shake the feeling that something dangerous was about to unfold right in front of them. The rancher moved quickly, faster than anyone had seen before, his actions sharp and precise, as though he had already decided the outcome and was racing against time itself. Every second felt stretched, every movement carried weight, and the entire scene turned into a moment of pure suspense where no one knew what would happen next or why it was happening at all. The stranger took a small step backward, his eyes wide, yet he did not run, as if he believed the rancher was his only chance of survival. The workers followed the order with growing anxiety, their minds filled with questions that had no answers, and the lack of explanation only made the situation feel more intense. The rancher's voice echoed again, not louder but firmer, pushing them to act without hesitation, and that tone alone made it clear that delay was not an option anymore. The ground seemed to hold its breath as everything moved at once, creating a chaotic rhythm that no one could control, and in that chaos, trust and fear mixed into one powerful force driving everyone forward. What they were doing still made no sense to most of them, yet something in the rancher's urgency made them believe it had to be done, even if the reason remained hidden, because deep down they felt that whatever he had seen, whatever he had understood in that brief moment, was far more serious than anything they could imagine. Then, without warning, the rancher did something no one expected. He grabbed a burning torch from the side of the stable and rushed toward the dry hay stacked near the center of the yard, and before anyone could react, he threw the flame straight into it, igniting a sudden blaze that rose fast and fierce, shocking every person standing there as gasps spread through the crowd and several workers stepped back in fear, unable to understand why he would risk destroying his own ranch. The fire crackled loudly, sending sparks into the air, and the heat pushed people farther away as whispers began to rise, confused voices questioning his sanity, some calling it a terrible mistake while others stared in disbelief, convinced that he had lost control of his judgment in a moment of panic. The stranger's eyes widened, reflecting both fear and something deeper, as if he understood a hidden reason behind the act, yet even he seemed uncertain of what would come. Next, the rancher did not hesitate or look back, his expression steady and focused as he moved with purpose, guiding a few workers with sharp gestures, directing them to shift equipment and clear space while the flames continued to grow, creating a wall of smoke that spread across the open land. The sky above seemed to darken slightly as the smoke climbed higher, turning the peaceful ranch into a scene of chaos and confusion where every second carried a sense of danger that could not be ignored. Some workers argued under their breath, questioning whether they should stop him before the fire spread further, but none dared to step forward because something in his presence still demanded trust even in the middle of what looked like destruction. The sound of burning would mixed with hurried footsteps and rising panic, forming a tense rhythm that echoed across the land as the situation spiraled into something no one had prepared for. The rancher stood firm, watching the fire closely, as if he was waiting for a precise moment, and that calm control in the middle of such chaos only made his actions seem even more mysterious to those around him. A few people began to believe that he had completely lost his mind, unable to see any logic in setting his own property on fire, while others felt a growing fear that this decision might lead to consequences they could not escape. The stranger remained near him, his breathing still uneven, but his eyes now fixed on the flames as if searching for something within them, and that silent connection between the two only deepened the tension for everyone watching. In that intense moment, confusion, fear, and doubt spread faster than the fire itself, and no one could tell whether they were witnessing a reckless mistake or a bold act driven by a reason too urgent to explain, because whatever the truth was, it was still hidden behind the rising smoke and the rancher's unwavering silence. Through the rising smoke, a distant sound finally reached the ranch, faint at first but growing clearer with every second, the sharp rhythm of approaching riders cutting through the tension, and in that moment the truth began to reveal itself as the stranger turned pale and stepped back, his fear no longer hidden because what he had tried to escape had found him again. The rancher did not move from his position, his eyes fixed on the edge of the land where shadowy figures appeared, riding fast and closing the distance with clear intent. And suddenly everything made sense in a way that silenced every doubt among the workers. The fire was never meant to destroy the ranch, it was meant to create a barrier, a signal, and a shield all at once, forcing the approaching riders to slow down and lose their clear path while filling the air with thick smoke that blurred vision and bought precious time. The workers who had questioned him moments ago now stood still, realizing that what seemed like reckless behavior was actually a calculated decision made in seconds under pressure. The stranger's breathing grew heavier as he looked at the rancher, a mix of relief and disbelief crossing his face because he understood that the man had chosen to protect him without even asking for the full story. The riders at the edge of the land hesitated as the fire blocked their direct approach, their movement breaking apart as they tried to navigate around the unexpected obstacle. And that delay was exactly what the rancher needed. He quickly guided the stranger toward a safer path behind the main structures, using the confusion to move him out of sight while the workers instinctively followed his silent direction, now trusting every decision without question. The fear that once filled the ranch slowly shifted into realization, as each person began to see the full picture forming right in front of them. The rancher had read the situation faster than anyone else, understanding the danger before it arrived and choosing action over explanation because there had been no time to convince others, only time to act. The flames continued to burn, but now they were no longer seen as destruction, they were protection, a bold line drawn between safety and threat, and the smoke rising into the sky became a symbol of his quick thinking rather than chaos. The stranger looked back one last time at the approaching figures, then at the rancher, his eyes filled with gratitude that words could not express because in a single moment, his life had been saved by a decision that others had mistaken for madness. The worker stood silently, watching everything unfold with a new understanding, realizing that courage does not always look calm or controlled. Sometimes it looks like risk, like urgency, like a choice that no one else is brave enough to make. And in that moment the truth stood clear in front of them, turning confusion into respect as the rancher's actions proved that what they had witnessed was never loss of control, but a powerful act of protection driven by instinct and fearless judgment. As the riders faded into the distance and the flames slowly came under control, a deep silence settled over the ranch, heavier than anything before, because everyone now understood what they had just witnessed. The workers lowered their heads, not in fear but in respect, realizing how quickly they had doubted a man who had just risked everything without hesitation. The stranger stood quietly, his eyes filled with gratitude that words could never fully express, knowing his life had been saved in a moment where there had been no time for explanations. The rancher remained still, his expression calm once again, as if nothing unusual had happened, yet his presence now carried a deeper meaning that no one would ever forget. No speeches were needed, no justifications were given, because his actions had already told the entire story, and from that day on, the region remembered one truth clearly: that real courage is not always understood in the moment, but it always reveals itself in the end.